Another blessing is all of you gathering here today. I'm so glad we can do this. I'm Carla Goldman. I'm on the faculty in the School of Social Work and the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan, and direct the Jewish Communal Leadership Program. And I am one of the direct inheritors of Armand's contributions in living his legacy every day. Dean Beth Angel is here to give a welcome from the school.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you today. And it's really an honor just to be able to, let's see if I can step further away maybe, to welcome you all to this circle of remembrance and tribute. I've been at the school since July 1st, 2022. So while technically I'm not the new dean anymore, I still feel kind of like the new dean. But one of the things that's really remarkable in my first 13 months here is that we've lost 3 of our retired faculty members within the space of that time. So exactly 1 year ago, I believe today, was the memorial service for Professor Emerita Rosemary Sari. And then yesterday was a memorial service for Professor Emeritus Charles Garvin. So these are losses that are weighty. You know, we really feel both that loss, but also a recognition of what these giants left behind. And today, we are going to remember another of our giants from the University of Michigan School of Social Work, Armand Lauffer. And I'm so grateful that we have this time to come together and to talk about Armand's legacy, about the work that he did that now lives on in our Jewish Communal Leadership Program, but also in sort of Jewish community and social services more broadly. And I've already been hearing some really wonderful stories about him. I wish that I had had a chance to meet him. And I know that there are some folks here who've had contact with him within the past year, and I'm hoping we'll hear more about him, about how he's been doing since he relocated back to Jerusalem after he retired in 2001. In any event, I want to issue a very, very special thank you to Carla Goldman and to the Jewish Communal Leadership Program staff and students for bringing this event together and for laying a beautiful table of delicious food and creating a gathering space that I know will be treasured by all of us. So thank you and welcome.
There are many memorials, anniversaries today, one of which is the dean joining us on her birthday. So thank you for doing that. That's a happy anniversary. But to note that it's very, what you just said about Rosemary Sari and a year ago, some of us were at the funeral for Charles Garvin yesterday, who was, as many of you know, a very close colleague and co-conspirator, I would guess, with Armand. So we're in the 7-day period of Jewish mourning, Shiva, for Charles. And I know some folks will be thinking about him too and speaking about him a little bit. Because my sense of it is we're thinking about 2 men of great vision and determination that made things happen that are still happening here, not just in the Jewish Communal Leadership Program, but also really is the foundation of the strength of the School of Social Work. Armand Lauffer died July 28th in Jerusalem, and July 28th is 30 days ago. So while we're in the first period of mourning for Charles, in the Jewish tradition, Shloshim, or 30, marks sort of that second stage of loss, of grief and mourning, practices of mourning, and then it carries on into the rest of the year. So we're really meeting at the right time, in the right place for folks here, right? Because I know, and I just from the messages that we got, what a loss is felt here in Ann Arbor and in Metro Detroit by the community, by graduates of Project STAR, and the Drockler program, and Jewish Communal Leadership Program students who didn't get a chance to interact with Armand, but thank you for being here, because this is an important place to be. And we're very happy as well, and I didn't even know this, to have a great family circle here. And a few people I have asked to speak. I think there'll be time if others want to share, if I didn't talk to you initially, but we'll start with some of the folks who I reached out to initially. So Howard, if you'd like to come, that would be great.
Thank you. My name is Howard Lupovich. Armand Lauffer was my uncle. I'm also a graduate of this fine institution. We've had a long connection, and it's very nice to be here. So first, I want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank the program at the department for honoring my uncle's memory today, and for all of you for coming and sharing in that honoring. So first, full disclosure, in my family, Armand Lauffer, we all knew his name was Armand Lauffer, but his name wasn't Armand to us. I have never in my life said the words Uncle Armand. He was always Uncle Avi to us. So I mean that's just. But so it's nice to honor Armand, but I also just wanted to mention, and the fact that he went by Avi sometimes instead of Armand wasn't just by coincidence. It was more than just a name. It reflected his deep love of Zionism, of the state of Israel, which he was very much a part of even before it was founded. And it's, I suppose in retrospect, that at first glance it might seem that they made Aliyah because their children made Aliyah, but the larger part of the story is that part of the reason their children, my cousins, made Aliyah is because Uncle Avi and Aunt Ricky, they instilled not only a deep love of Israel in my cousins, but also a deep connection. They spent multiple years in Israel while they were growing up, so it's not surprising. It's more than just a personal connection. In some ways, in retrospect, moving to Israel was a foregone conclusion. And one of my favorite stories about Uncle Avi has to do with just that, his deep love of Israel and Zionism. There are so many stories, but I'm going to share this one, and you might have heard it. Before the founding of the state, right around 1948, Israel was the future state of Israel was in desperate need of weapons, and my uncle Avi was living in upstate New York in Westchester, and he was smuggling guns to Israel. One day he was driving to the port, which I always thought was Boston Harbor, but it turns out it was a different port. But it doesn't matter. But he was driving to the port with a truck just filled with guns, and he got pulled over by a police officer. Who was, that was going to be some trouble. And now at this point in the story, we have a little machloket. We have a little, let's call it a disagreement as to what happened next. Some say that he was able to figure out that this policeman was Irish American. Some say based on his accent. Some say based on the name on his badge. In any case, my uncle Avi figured out that the police officer was Irish American, and he was asked where he was driving with all these guns. He said, without hesitating, with that Armand Lauffer smoothness, he said, "I'm driving them to the port to send to Israel to fight the British." Long story short, he got an escort to the port from this police officer. Isn't that just him in a nutshell? They loved living in Ann Arbor. They loved being here. He loved being part of this place, this community of people who shared his own sense of critical thinking, open-mindedness, and of course, that layer of irreverence, which also made him so great and such a great storyteller. Even if you've never been to their house, you know the house, because if you stand on Wells and you face Burns Park, the house immediately, that one house immediately on the right, that's where they lived for decades. That was the Lauffer house. He loved what he did. He was good at it, and he made a good living at it. That's the career trifecta we all strive to accomplish. He loved helping people. But even more than he loved helping people, or as much as he loved helping people, he loved teaching and training his students how to help people. He loved passing that urge, that ability to help people along to others. Maybe owing to what he did, he recognized the very Jewish notion that helping others, gemilut chesed, acts of kindness, isn't only something done individually, person to person, but it's also done as a community. And he recognized the importance of building institutions that would allow individuals to, in a maximal way, to help others. He loved being part of that. And he loved as a way to maximize not only the financial support that people could provide, but also that finite human time, human energy, to maximizing it in a way to help as many people as possible in as many ways as possible. In many ways, I think that was the essence of his career. Believe it or not, I remember the day, I was much, much younger, when he mentioned to me an idea he had about fusing the School of doing something between the School of Social Work and the Judaic Studies program here as well. He said it's something that really hadn't been done yet, but he began to think about it. And a few years later, the STAR program was born, and then, of course, became the Drockler program. But it's something that he wanted to do for a very long time and got great satisfaction that it actually not only came to fruition, but it really became something dynamic and successful as it is now. For me, I could speak personally. He was one of the reasons I became an academic. He, along with another aunt and uncle, it wasn't just that they were academics and I saw the lifestyle and the lifestyle looked so great, but they would sit around the table and have these well, you know, it's a nice life. They would sit around the table and discuss and debate. I didn't say it was a perfect life. I said it was a nice life. They would discuss and debate, and when I was old enough, they would let me be part or try to be part of these discussions and debates. And I just remember thinking as a teenager, this is life. I want to be part of this. So I'll always owe him that. Not to mention that the first time I wrote a grant application, let's say it didn't hurt to have an uncle who wrote the book on how to write grant applications. I would say his advice was invaluable, but it was, in this case, valuable and could be measured in a very specific dollar amount, because using his method, that's a good way to write grants. If you have to write grants, just get his book on grant writing. It's just a silver bullet. It works great. Yeah, there was a point as a young scholar when I realized that he and I, even though we were in different departments, in different disciplines, we were actually working on very similar things. I write about Jewish communal institutions and organizations in the past and other places. He writes about them now, and it was something that we found that we have in common. Now, I mentioned my other aunt and uncle who are also academics. They couldn't be here today, but they did ask me to add something, and I want to speak. I'm going to speak for them for just a word or two. When I asked them, to reflect on their relationship with Avi, and they knew him for decades, both as a colleague, as a fellow academic, but also as a brother-in-law, they said two things. First, they said, and I quote, "He was a man with great capacities to love, to serve, to share, to learn, and to listen." He also said that the symmetry behind these virtues was encapsulated in a poem that his granddaughter, Nama, recited at his funeral. And I just want to read you a short excerpt of this poem, which in so many ways captured. Now, she knew him as Saba, grandpa. So she says, quote, "My Saba was a writer, a speaker, a believer, a real-life teacher. My Saba, most beautiful baby in Belgium, Nazi escaper, magical storyteller, hero. My Saba, proudest Judaism activist, the true definition of a social justice warrior, if ever there was one." I think she really captured the essence of who he was and the accomplishments of his life. The other thing that my aunt and uncle wanted to add was that Uncle Avi, Armand, was always true to his authentic self in all situations and in all relationships. And fittingly, I think I want to end with a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who had many insights on a great many things, who said the following, but I think this applies so aptly to my uncle. Quote, "To stand is to stand for. We are closer to God when we are asking questions than when we think we know the answers. When I was young, I used to admire intelligent people. As I grow older, I admire kind people." Now, Heschel said that, but Armand Lauffer could easily have said that too. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you so much for that. So now we have contributions from both Armand's colleagues and his students. And Robin, would you be willing to start us off with that? And let me just say, I also want to thank the folks who really were very important in making this happen, who encouraged me or, give me feedback. So Sue Safansky, I want to thank you, and Robin Axelrod, and Rebecca Starr for being a consultant and picking up the food. So thank you so much. It really made me feel like it's good to do things in a community, especially for someone like this.
It's a pleasure to see so many important faces and important, influential people in my life, my career, my professional life, my personal life. But it's such a time warp. And in addition to really feeling the 50 pounds that I've put on since I've seen many of you, I'm feeling the weight of just time. Anya, you and I were pregnant when we met with our first children who are now 31 years old. Well, yours is. Okay. So I just want to acknowledge the weight, not mine, the weight of the moment and how special it is to be with all of you. We have all, the entire world has lost a magnificent person and a gentle soul, a remarkable teacher. Armand was a giant in my life, and he was a giant in the fields of social work and Jewish community leadership. He taught and influenced countless students around the world, many of whom are here today, and others who, if this is being recorded, will definitely be watching. And one of those students is me. If we are lucky, we meet people during our lives who influence us in ways we could never imagine. And sometimes we meet them serendipitously, and other times we meet them by way of introduction. Either way, these precious people leave an indelible mark that change us for the better. And one such person for me was Armand Lauffer. At 19 years old, I could not have known that he would become such an influential figure in my life. And I did say 19 years old, and I imagine there might be people here thinking, you were a teenager when you met Armand? I thought you were 30 when you started working with him. Indeed, the first time I met Armand was during my first year here at Michigan. I had returned from what's now called a gap year in Israel, where my husband, Brad, was rooming with my boyfriend. This whole communal thing is so incestuous. I was 19 and Armand was a very young man of 47. One Sunday afternoon that fall, I was leading a Young Judea youth group meeting, and Tamar Lauffer, Ricky and Armand's daughter, was in that youth group, and she offered to host. She offered for her parents to host that day's meeting. And my two most vivid memories of that day were Tamar's grace and kindness and the comfort I felt meeting Armand and Ricky and being in their house. And just like you were saying, Howard, there was something so amazing about the academicness that was their home. And that's the kind of home I came from. And I immediately felt at home. Their house was more than just a house. It was a place filled with books and beautiful art and ideas and thinking and grappling and invitations to disagree with one another and try to get to a better understanding of whatever it was that was being talked about. I vividly remember the scent of treats in the oven that Ricky was making and traces of pipe tobacco wafting through the air. I knew then that pipe smoking was bad for your health, but it was so relaxing and I really enjoyed it. It was soothing. And I didn't know at the time that I would return to that house on Wells countless times. The next 35 years, memories every time I walked in there that piqued the same warmth and similar aromas I experienced at age 19. Fast forward many years later, now I'm 30, and I found myself in the Freeze building, that wonderful building with no air conditioning, and Armand's office was on the 3rd floor. And here I was talking with Professor Lauffer. I reminded him who I was. He was so gracious, smoking a pipe. We were in his office with the door closed, so the pipe smell was less soothing, but comforting nonetheless. And he was talking to me about a new Jewish communal service program that he had recently launched here in the School of Social Work. And by the end of our meeting, I went to talk to him for ideas about ways that I could use my degree in Judaic studies, my undergrad degree, and ways that I could use my law degree, and how could I put them together, and what options did he recommend? And by the end of this lunch meeting, he had offered me the opportunity to join him and Neil Guterman in getting this new program, Project STAR, off the ground. And we all make wise decisions, hopefully, in our lives, and some stupid decisions. I don't know what it was that allowed me to make the wisest decision of my professional career. I jumped on board and said, I am all in. And what I had the joy of experiencing during that time of our professional partnership was Armand's brilliance, his creativity. He was an innovator. He was a doer. He, in the 1980s and the early 90s, the handful of graduate programs designed to teach students to lead North American Jewish nonprofits, they were all affiliated, there were a few of them, and those that existed were affiliated with a seminary or private university, either in California or on the East Coast. And Armand said, now we need one right here in the Midwest, and there is no place better than this public institution, the University of Michigan. We're gonna make it so, and he did. It's been called different things, like Howard said. It was Project STAR, then the Drockler program, and now JCLP. And in every iteration, it invented itself and reinvented itself, and to this day is represented. The legacy is amazing work that alumni are doing all around the world, and I'm just happy to have been a part of it. So through the years, there's so much that I wrote down that I'm just gonna speak off the top of my head here. Through the years, Armand was my supervisor, my mentor, my Burns Park neighbor, and most precious of all, my friend. Really, he was my friend. He opened doors for me that I didn't even know were there. Armand and Ricky lived in that house that Howard talked about on Wells Street. And just by sheer coincidence, the first house that Brad and I bought was kitty corner across the street on the corner of Olivia and Wells. And across Olivia were Armand and Ricky's son and daughter-in-law, Josh and Orly. So I saw Armand and Ricky all the time. They'd be walking to Josh and Orly's, and Josh was, and I imagine still is, a Pied Piper. So there were always these people, and it was fun. Armand came over with work for me to do whenever it needed to be done. And there was one day he came over, the doorbell rang, and I said to Brad, it was very early in the morning, and I was in labor with our first child, Robert. And I said, it's Armand Lauffer. I just know it. And he said, no, Armand knows what's going on. And I said, it is Armand, and he's going to have work for me to do because he's going on sabbatical tomorrow. Brad assured me, just relax. It is not Armand. Sure enough, it was. I hear Armand downstairs. Brad explains, I'm in labor. And Armand said, Bisha'a Tova, may it be an easy and wonderful birth. But here's something I really need typed up before I leave. And I did it. I did it. I just want to say a couple of, I want people to visualize the Armand that is so precious and dear in our minds. He had a uniform of a khaki or olive kind of green colored shirt with khaki or olive green colored pants, and that outfit was topped off, of course, by socks, not necessarily new, socks with, what are those called? Birkenstocks. It was his uniform, and he was so proud of it, just incredibly proud of his uniform. He said, people know it's me from a mile away. He had an amazing sense of humor, and he was also ahead of his time in terms of technology and how it could be used in education. He thought he was adept at all things technology, but he wasn't. He wasn't. He would make it there, but if you can envision Armand sitting at his desk or standing at his desk, typing with the two fingers, sometimes a pinky, sometimes a thumb, and then his hands would go up and he'd say, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. It's all gone. And he would call somebody, usually me or Brad, and it was always retrievable. He had very, very high standards, and there was one time I let him down. And I apologized at the time, but it stays with me all these years later. I was in a group project. So I worked with Armand at Project STAR in the Drockler program, and then I became a student in the program. And Anya Abramson and I were in a group doing a group project, and it stunk. It was really poor quality, and I'm not saying anything that is a surprise to you. We were in a group with other people who didn't pull their weight. And we made do, but it was a lengthy presentation of this, that, and the other thing. And Armand, who would sit, with his hands behind his head. When we were done, he said, that was not good. And it was as if he had said, you failed in life. That's how it felt. And we had to do it again. And I'm grateful that he made us do it again, because I remember it very well. I remember getting in trouble. And I also remember doing a much better job in learning from the project that we did. So I just want to say that I'm beyond grateful to have had Armand in my life as a friend, as a mentor, as a colleague, as a partner in our professional growing of this program. And he and Ricky together created the most extraordinary family, the most extraordinary family. And my heart really breaks for all of you and for, oh, hi. I don't know if you remember me. I'm Robin Axelrod. Yeah. I'm seeing another Lupovich here. The family is awesome. And my heart breaks for all of you and for all of us who knew and loved Armand. And his name and his memory will forever be a blessing. That's it.
You know, it's striking that somebody who, I was thinking about both Charles and Armand, you know, very devoted to group work, importance of their field, also meant creating community, right? Communal work also means community. And thank you for sharing all of that. And I had that sense yesterday too, and talking about the world that Armand created, that Charles created, they created together with their colleagues here seems like a very special, precious time. And we have a few folks who will speak to that. I want to read something from Robert Ortega, professor and associate dean here at the School of Social Work, because I had asked him to say something about both Armand and Charles together, since I think it's appropriate also to keep Charles in mind. I choose to remember Armand by his smile. Every time we saw each other, he greeted me with a smile. He welcomed me as a new faculty, and while I don't remember his exact words, I remember his sincerity. We worked together during a curricular redesign, and I recall after one meeting in which we talked about course objectives, Armand appeared discouraged. He wasn't able to convince the group that more objectives didn't make a course better. He urged us to consider that a more focused course with clearer objectives had more value and meaning than one that promises everything, but is unlikely to deliver on its promise. To Armand, promises have their roots in hope, but promising more doesn't promise better. Yesterday, we said goodbye to Charles Garvin, another beloved faculty. Both instilled in me a sense of belonging and a firmness in their convictions. I was fortunate to cross paths with both of them and carry a message that encapsulates my memories of them. They both taught me that in our promise to make a difference, we must be mindful of its potential. In all we do, we must do it with the sincerity of hope. And with love to both and to those who love them, Robert Ortega. John Trotman, would you like to?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Trotman. I am an emeritus professor here. I've been a professor for quite a while and was briefly, after Armand left, head of the program. And some of the people I work with are here today. So I was sort of an interim custodian, but I really enjoyed the time and have enjoyed working with the students ever since. When Robin mentioned Armand's outfit, it brought to mind those sandals. Well, I thought they were sandals, but they were really Birkenstocks. I didn't have any Birkenstocks, but I did have sandals, and I wore them today just to, I mean, it doesn't really fit with my hair is tweaked, but I wore them today just to sort of remind me of Armand, and it's a little too early in the season to wear socks, which he also wore with those sandals, and it didn't seem to bother him, but it did create a little bit of comment. Anyway, Armand was one of my best friends, and he was the most elegant and gracious man that I have had the chance to meet. And I'm now pleased to add gun runner to that list of accomplishments, which I didn't know. He was fun to work with, as you already heard. And he was always able, and I think you picked this up too, to help people with papers. I sent him papers to look at. He always read them and almost always gave me detailed comments, most frequently longer than the manuscript itself. And you would think, well, that he's trying like to become a co-author, weasel his way into, it wasn't that. It was because he was a synthetic thinker. And what I mean by that is he not only collected the dots, he connected the dots. And you sort of heard how he said, well, there's a program here on the West Coast, there's a program here on the East Coast, and we need a program here, and it'll fill this. And so he was always sort of putting those things together in a way. And he and I did share and failed at sharing one of the things about the curriculum that you've also heard of trying to keep the sort of requirements and objectives down. And we both agreed that a good standard would be that you should have no more objectives in a course than there are weeks in the semester. We failed routinely at getting that. Those objectives just kept creeping up until it sort of became actually an issue, but we never really were able to resolve it because everybody had, their little piece of this and a little piece of that they wanted to sort of shoehorn in. So that to me was a sort of collegial arrangement that I valued a lot, and people have talked about the collegial arrangements and sort of pleasant life of the professor. And I think that's certainly true, but there's also a lot of disagreement that runs there. And he was always able to raise questions about things, and why you're thinking that, and why. So he was a challenger as well as anything else in terms of his thinking. We shared macro interests. Social work does have its share of a clinical focus, but we were sort of interested in the running of organizations, of helping them be ethical, of helping them run with sort of better organizational practices. And one of the things that we did agree on was this phrase that you often hear, that nonprofit organizations should run like a business. And he would always say, no, they shouldn't run like a business because businesses go out of business. Everybody ought to run on sort of good organizational practices, whatever kind of organization you have. And we sort of work together in the SAGE series of books to try to provide guides to people. I had a book in that series, and so work with him on that. His success in initiating JCLP was a major innovation in the school. And it attracted people. And one of the things that some of you here know, and some of you may not, is that students historically have come to our school because they could get things that you couldn't get elsewhere. And that was one of those things, and it still is. So I guess I would just conclude by saying his energy, focus, spirit, and cooperation with others will remain a guide, I think, and a light for the school in time to come. So let's not forget that. Thank you very much.
Carrie Alterman.
I know all of those Lupoviches. It's nice to see all of you. It's funny, between Robin and Howie, so much of what I wrote, and I really wrote a small thing, has already been covered. But I have to say, when I stand in this building, like Robin, I'm reminded that this isn't where I received my degree. We were over at what is now North Quad, at the Fries building, that amazingly unusual shaped Samach building where it didn't complete itself. And those of us would often you'd have a class here and a class here, but to get from here to here, you had to go here. And it was incredibly frustrating, but it taught you also about efficiencies, which Armand would often speak about as well. When I met Armand, I met him in that building. I interviewed for the program after learning about it from my cousin, who at the time was the executive director of Temple Israel in Detroit. And I'd been involved in campus life here at the university as an undergrad. And I was deciding about going to law school. And another cousin of mine said to me, "That's ridiculous. You're happiest when you're doing Jewish things. Why would you go to law school?" And thankfully, his mother, the director of Temple Israel, said to me, "There's a new program. I got a flyer in the mail. There's a thing at U of M that you should look at." So I applied, and I went to this interview, and the interviews were a panel. And I had no idea really what I was walking into, really. Some of the people on the panel were familiar, like Michael Brooks, the longtime director at U of M Hillel, who I had been involved with. And then others were I had no idea. And one face stood out because one exuded warmth, curiosity, comfort, interest. And of course, as you know, that was Armand. From that first experience, every conversation, every class, every discussion was an opportunity really for growth and for candor and little trickles of knowledge that touched us, each student, enabling us to deepen our understanding of Jewish life. Many stand out, but among my favorites was always the gun running story. And I wrote it out, Howie. And to know that I only heard it once, 25 or 30 years ago, and that this is a story that has been discussed in your family for generations is really, it made me feel, I kept thinking, maybe I imagined this. But what I did, the one thing I can offer to what you spoke about is that a few years ago in my role, I work in philanthropy, and we had a grantee who was working in Israel to document all the stories from 1948 of people who had assisted in the establishment of the state of Israel. They had been chronicling all the first-person sources. And then they turned, we were able to work with them to think about those people in the diaspora who had helped, who hadn't picked up and moved or had not fought, but who had done things here from afar to assist. And I made sure they interviewed Armand because I wanted to make sure that that story got in the canon in the National Library of Israel to understand. I remember, I always heard it was an Irish surname. It was not the accent. In his and Ricky's home, as Robin talked about, it was a house that all of us were familiar with. I remember actually more the macrame and the art. For some reason, the macrame always stood out. But what I remembered about it was that continuity. The continuity that at some point, the rumor was always that that's where Raoul Wallenberg lived when he was a student at the university in the 1920s and 30s. I would always think of his house as being filled with wisdom and warmth. Of course, Birkenstocks and socks, I actually wrote that too, because that was the first time I ever saw Birkenstocks worn with socks, which is now, it's a very common thing. It was new for me. But toward the end of my first year in graduate school, I was burnt out. We all know that feeling. When you go straight from undergrad into graduate, sometimes it can be overwhelming. And I went to meet with him and I said, I think I should take some time off. I don't know what I'm doing. This is really not the best idea. And he was the consummate social worker and sat and redirected my concerns, talked through the questions and the reality of the very few classes I needed to finish, allowed me to really figure out and create my own path, which I did in that summer, and said to me, now you decide. We've laid it out, it's your decision. And truly, he was the social worker's social worker. He educated, he advised, he certainly lectured. He inspired, he demonstrated, he loved. And I think of the program today, that continuity, and Professor Trautman, you spoke a little bit about this, that continuity between practice and reality, and study and reality, and it lives on. I always think of the Wednesday night pro seminars, that now the JCLP program 30 years later Students are still meeting on Wednesday nights in ways that are talking about what they learned in grad school and how it actually applies as they'll go out into the field. To us, I think all of us can say our lives were better because Armand was in it. And to his family, both by relation and by profession, I offer my condolences and love. And as we say, as Robin said, we say, may his memory be for a blessing, but truly, Armand's life was a blessing, and we know it will live on for generations of those of us who have chosen to become professional Jewish leaders. Thank you.
Say that house, I think, had really great karma. And I believe that a social work professor lives there today. Joe Ryan, I think, is in that house. Diane, can you join us?
Good afternoon. I'm Diane Kaplan-Vinokur. I am an emerita of the faculty here, and I knew Armand for a long, long time. Before I talk about Armand, though, I would like to bring you greetings from someone who was not able to come here today, though he really wanted to, and that's Harold R. Johnson, who is the Dean Emeritus of the School of Social Work, one of them, and he's now age 97 and articulate as always. His colleagueship and his friendship with Armand lasted many years. It began at Wayne State University in the mid-1950s, where they both obtained MSW degrees. Again, he regrets he could not see you today, and he sends his best regards and condolences. I've known Armand since the 1970s. When I was finishing my dissertation here, I was cloistered in the school's social work center building at 1015 East Huron. It's since been knocked down. And I was busy writing the dissertation, and he had all the rest of the first floor running a continuing education project. And it's those kind of projects, which I don't think we've talked much about yet, that I wanted to focus on because I think it helps the students who are in the program now and the program to come, that they stand on the shoulders of some giants. And I want those giants to come more alive for them. Excuse me. Our paths also crossed in the Jewish community here in Ann Arbor. It should be remembered that Armand and his wife Ricky were instrumental in establishing Camp Ra'anana, a summer experience for children that continues today. They were also helpful to the local Hebrew Day School, where Ricky taught art, so my children also directly benefited from their efforts. Now I'd like to briefly recount 3 things about Armand. First, his persona, his manner, his color choices, which have already been mentioned, and his talent for craft. Second, his large and wide contribution to graduate and continuing social work education resources, and an alternative perspective that he once said that has stuck with me to this day. For those who never met him, he had a certain cool of elegance about him. He never raised his calm voice that I ever saw, even when he was arguing civilly some point in a heated faculty committee meeting. He was never ostentatious, always wearing comfortable, thank you, comfortable neutral clothes in the greens and browns that have already been, khakis that have already been mentioned. And I think that this had an effect of making him kind of more approachable to students, this guy in sandals. His sense and talent for craft were illustrated when I once visited him in Jerusalem in their apartment in Ein Kerem in Jerusalem. I sat in a large, sleek comfortable chair in this living room. And Ricky mentioned, by the way, that Armand had built that chair and other furniture in the living room from the crates that had brought all of their household to Israel. I was dumbfounded. So everything, I think, that he did really did have craft in it, how he thought about things, how he put things together, as John mentioned. And whether he was writing, whether he was creating programs, or whether he was designing Project Star's first logo, there was a craft and attention to detail that was very important. Armand's educational impact went far beyond this school of social work. His own books, as mentioned by about grants, were widely read and still used. It's now in its third edition. But I think that 22 years of leadership at Sage Publications as a senior consulting editor and co-chair of the editorial board for the Human Services really helped to elevate the field of social work and bring helpful instruction, accessible instruction, and needed innovations to social work. It also helped the name of the School of Social Work to be even more widely spread, since the school sponsored an early series of these books. So I brought some artifacts. I think he really, as John mentioned, that he recruited faculty here and also at other institutions. People like Ann Hartman in the clinical side of things, people like John Trotman on the macro side of things. So it covered a broad perspective on human services. And I think that it really helped to raise the field. These were often used in continuing education courses. So it was people who were in the field trying to figure out the run their agency, trying to figure out how to use telephone therapy way back in the 70s or 80s, things that have blossomed into realities today. Also, his development of games and simulations for teaching students about the real processes that they would encounter in the field in an age before video. Processes like negotiation, coalition building, and understanding your social agency, the title of one of his books, added greatly to their classroom experiences and their field experiences as well. So I think it shows the breadth of social work that he contributed to, and these works you will find widely distributed, not only in the United States. Finally, Armand taught me about how do you coordinate rights and responsibilities. In one faculty meeting, and I don't remember exactly what the whole issue was about. It was somebody was saying that something should get rights and somebody should get rights and we should all vote for it, and they made a very direct appeal, and this was argued and discussed and, meat grinded into details. And finally, Armand raised his hand and he said, every right also has responsibilities attached to it. What about the responsibilities? It was something that really stopped me and has made me think about it every time somebody asks for some kind of privilege, some institution is going to try to do something to grant rights. How are those responsibilities that are attached to them be conveyed as well? And I guess possibly that they come from his immigrant experience. Many of you know the pride that people who have obtained the right to be American citizens how eagerly they grasp the responsibility to vote. So it's something that to ponder, I think, as you think about Armand and in your lives as they go on. I hope that you will all think of him in those important moments, and that this cool guy is looking down on us and smiling.
Just I wanted to share a little bit from one of Project STAR students, Raviv Schwartz, who sent a bit of a recollection of his engagement with Armand, much like we heard before, of it coming from, Raviv had moved to Israel some years before and came back to be part of Project STAR, and what it meant to sit with Armand, who really took he felt a deep connection to both being part of the same Zionist movement, but also just sort of never feeling alone, feeling like he had really a mentor, and even he said as a father figure for me. What I wanted to share was what he shared about when Armand moved to Jerusalem, and Raviv was there as well. He said, so when they were both there, Armand asked me to join him in setting up an MA program for nonprofit management with an emphasis in world Jewish communal service at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, what is now Reichman University. It was interesting and gratifying for me at the time to have made the transition from being his student to being his colleague and trying to create a new academic program. A few years later, I was asked to teach in the newly opened master's program at Hebrew University's School of Social Work in Nonprofit Management and Leadership. During one of the summer semesters of the program, I was teaching a course on nonprofit governance and the role of boards, and asked Armand to serve as a guest lecturer. What a special experience it was to be hosting him in a class I was teaching. For me, this was no doubt a poignant closing of a circle, and I'm quite sure Armand felt the same way. And just that sense of like staying connected, and something that we say here, we're all teachers, we're all learners, but you certainly get that sense where Armand, I'm hearing it, he was there and leaning back and all of that, but also where people felt embraced by him and part of his circle. Barry Checkaway?
I'll start just by saying one thing, is that sometimes events like this are not very specific about a person. They're kind of vague, but this is not. And it's just a kind of a testament to the person and then the people who knew him, that they all remember very specific things, like what did he wear? I just find that just so interesting. It's really about the person themselves, and that they had such an impact on people. So I'm glad to add to it. I was going to wear what Armand wore, and I still do. I have these shirts that are under your collar. It's like, military, army kind of things. I have shirts like this, and when I look at them, I remember him. And I was going to wear one today, but I could hear my mother say to me, no, you should dress in the middle. You shouldn't dress like Armand did. Armand was a colleague. He was a neighbor. We lived across as well in the same neighborhood as other people did. And he was also a friend and a person in our lives. Everything that has been said is such a treasure. To go into Armand's house, it was like, he probably had the largest Judaica collection of anybody here in Ann Arbor. You would go in there and you would have smells that you really wouldn't smell in a kind of a sanitary place like Ann Arbor. You'd smell it in the streets of Jerusalem, really, those kinds of smells. He and Ricky welcomed us, Margie and I, when we arrived, and it was just a pleasure to get to know him. At the time, so many of you would not know, this is where the School of Social Work have their faculty meetings. So this is a business place for many of us. And Charles Garvin is not here, but he really should be over there. And Armand is not here, and he really should be over here. And I can hear the kinds of conversations that they would have. And as coming here as a young faculty member, these people were big in my world. A word about this group of people, some of whom are here. At the time, the University of Michigan School of Social Work was the largest and the oldest program in community organization in the world. It was a place you could come to get a degree in community organization, a graduate degree. Many organizers come from other spheres and not from academia at all. But if you wanted to get a master's degree and wanted to do community work, this was one of the places that you would come. Armand was a major producer of people, both as a scholar, but also as a teacher and a trainer. Charles Garvin, our colleague who died and whose funeral was yesterday, at an earlier point in his life, he was a community organization scholar and a writer, and then went on to help establish group work, small group work as a field. John Trotman, similarly, was a major force. Each of these people wrote like 20 books. I mean, these are not, they may look like normal people, but they really, I wondered how they could write all these books. Armand was good for a book or two a year for many, many years. Very interesting how at the end of the day, they all would write. That was about them. Jack Rothman, certainly one of the major figures in the field of social work, who was a conceptual thinker. Howard Brabson. Howard Brabson was the founder of the National Association of Black Social Workers, and he was a major force in the field. You could go right down the list, and together, these were some of the most productive people that you can imagine. And Michigan was one of the places. I would say all told, I don't like to count things, but there probably were 200 to 300 books written among them for these couple of decades. When Harold Johnson came here, not here with us today, and served as a leader in the community intervention world, Harold headed up this program for a while. Most of us did head up the program for a while. And Harold, under Harold, there were 15 courses in community organization. Chicago had 2. Columbia had 3. So we were big as well as going into depth. And if you wanted to study community, this was one of the places that you would come. And this was an amazing group of people. Armand I thought of as a social planner, because I have a background in urban planning, and I knew of Armand because he was interested in planning in the social tradition, which was something that really appealed to many of us. Armand was always, I thought, a binational person. He was a citizen of the United States, and he also was a citizen of the State of Israel. And he had commitments to both, I believe. The University of Michigan, another characteristic of it, we were a way station between Israel and the United States. There were people from Israel, largely at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who during periods of their lives, especially during the Intifada and other violent periods, these people, they were grad students, doctoral students, and professors. They would come to University of Michigan to spend a semester, almost as if it were a peaceful paradise away from that. But the U of M also produced doctoral students and faculty who then would go and populate the universities in Israel with social work. So there was an influence there. And Armand was always a liaison between those two. He would greet you when you came, he would wave to you, come back when you left. Interesting that I myself was the kind of recipient of his influence when he and a committee offered me a position as a visiting professor at Hebrew University, and I could hear Armand's influence in my experience there. There was nothing like it. Armand always had a vision about preparing people for leadership positions in Jewish community agencies. And when Armand had a vision, as soft-spoken as he was unyielding, he was fierce. He would not stop at anything that he thought was important. And his vision almost always had a social justice commitment to it, in addition to his identity as a person, as a Jewish person, and his commitments to the Jewish community. He was the founder of Project STAR, the precursor to the Drackler program, and now the Jewish Communal Leadership Program under Carla, who has inherited this great legacy that came to us. His vision, just to say, the specific contribution in my mind about Armand's vision was that he was a multicultural person before there were other multicultural people. And what I'll say about that is, because we hear the term multicultural all the time, it's overused, he was not a pluralist who believed in the pluralism of groups. He believed that there was a vision where you could be a practitioner in the community, always at the community level in my experience with him, that you would, he was trying to help people understand that you could both respect the culture of a particular group, but also recognize the diversity of the society in which they lived. And that to me is, for an effective person as an American Jew, to me that's part of what it was all about. You respect your own culture and you work for your own culture, but you also know you're going to be working in a larger society. And for Jewish people, that is largely the Christian society, which is not Jewish. And so he wanted to train people, prepare people who would both know something about the tradition of being Jewish, what that meant, but also wanted to prepare them to be able to work in the broader community. That's why he thought the University of Michigan as a public university was a place that you might come, because we're public. I would say that watching him build support for that, he did this everywhere. He did it in the former states of the Soviet Union. I mean, he would carry this everywhere that he went as a teacher and a trainer. At Michigan, there are things at the University of Michigan that happen elsewhere in the world, but they might not happen here unless you have support for it. Because these can be wonderful people, but they're tough in the way they think about many of these things. I remember him building support for this innovative program in a largely Christian faculty. They all loved the idea. But there were two senior faculty who didn't love the idea. They challenged Armand. And I remember it's like they were standing up here and having a debate. It was fascinating. Two faculty members who said, why should we as a public university be preparing people for in a program that has some religious aspects? Because this is a very secular university. It's not a religious university at all. And they stood up and they said, actually, Jews should assimilate. Jews should not have their own. They could have their own, but they should not, but they should assimilate. I never really quite got that until years later when I realized, and these people were like, major forces in the field. They both were older, senior Jewish faculty. They had grown up in New York City where they had been taught separately in their family, you should assimilate in their lives. And therefore, if Jews do not assimilate, it will put them at risk in the world. You're supposed to assimilate. You don't have just a Jewish group. That, I think, was his contribution as a multicultural person. I'll just say a couple more things, one or two more things about it. That, to me, was a major contribution to the field, because he was able to not only get this program launched, they finally agreed, I guess, I don't know, although in the spirit of being a faculty member, not everyone agrees on much. But he was able to get them to come over to his side. But he also, and someone mentioned, he's a very entrepreneurial person. He found funding for everything that he wanted to do. And when that was done, unlike many visionaries who have great ideas, Armand always left institutions behind him. The work was not over when he wrote the books. The work would only be over when there was a program in place that would continue. Armand's home was a special place for us, and again, we could see it across the street. I will mention that these things that are being said about Armand building things out of the wood that was left behind, his house looked like that. I mean, it looked like it was sort of made of pieces of wood he had gathered somewhere, and the inside of it looked like that too. When his son Josh moved into the place across the street, 2 houses away from where he had grown up, Josh, the first thing he did was build a little mountain on his lawn. We would look right across at this. And we were afraid to ask Josh because we wouldn't ask him what that was. But we did ask Armand what it was that Josh was doing. Josh had grown up in a family which had spent much of his time in Israel. Armand said, he's trying to reproduce the hills of Jerusalem. Now, that would violate the zoning laws in Ann Arbor, to be sure. But there was this mountain and these big rocks, these big stones, right across the street, and it was, the stones of Israel. Amazing. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. We're going to wrap up. I have one more piece to share. Please, before folks leave, if you'll just sign in, we'd like to share with Ricky and the family who is here. And if you have any memories you'd like to share with them, we're going to do that as well. So you can if there's too many people at a pad, just rip out a page and write it somewhere else. Thank you so much to everybody for sharing these thoughts. Thank you, Barry, for that. I think it sort of brings a few things together. That, thinking about both Charles and Armand, they came out of working in Jewish community and Jewish community centers, and they came here and they were these major forces in the broader field of social work. But with that, and always still building Jewish community, both of them. And in Armand's case, bringing it back, right, to Jewish community, and that idea that we are strengthened by the identities and the communities that we are particular to us, but don't have to be insular, aren't walls, right? Should be bridges. And that's something that we really want to carry on. And also the fact that, as you said, he wasn't content to sort of do something and I did it, but like to want to carry it on. And he was here with us and he went around and talked to the dean and others to say, how are you going to support this new iteration of the program? And wrote a long report to support it. And I think it's so important that we continue to remember that that's where we're standing. And if it means continuing to reimagine, that's also in Armand's tradition. And we were going to sort of ask people to do that together here, but I think that instead, let's all keep doing that. Let's have these conversations. Let's have these communities, and as we do, to think about how we build our past on our future on the basis of these foundations that they've left us. So I just want to finish up with a message from Bob Aronson, who was the leader of the Metro Detroit Jewish Federation for many years and is still or is back as a supporter of the Jewish Communal Leadership Program. But he really worked very closely with Armand and raised a lot of those funds together with him. So I thought it'd be very appropriate, part of the foundation in the future, to share these. I first met Armand in November of 1989, a month after I started my job as director of the Jewish Federation of Metro Detroit. This nice, mild-mannered, and soft-spoken man came into my office. It was Professor Armand Lauffer from the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan. He explained to me that he had started a lay leadership educational program called Project STAR. Its purpose, he explained, was to educate the lay leaders of our local agencies on how to be more effective leaders. He also had a program, he explained, on how our Jewish professionals in Detroit could improve their relations with their volunteer partners. He showed me a whole brochure with course listings and everything. I was simply amazed. In my previous 14 years in Jewish communal service, I had never heard of such a thing. Armand became a mentor to me in this field of professional development. He taught me that Jewish communal service was a discipline worth investing in. Most of all, he taught me how important the role of the Jewish professional was in changing our entire Jewish world. This was a lesson I have kept with me throughout my career, thanks to Armand Lauffer. As we continued to talk, it became clear to me and Armand that we needed to focus on the education and training of Jewish professionals. And what better place than the highly regarded School of Social Work at the University of Michigan? And what better teacher than Armand Lauffer? And so the STAR program, Project STAR at the University of Michigan was born. Our first class began in those early 1990s. Project STAR then became the Drockler program, named after one of my wonderful predecessors, and Bob was very active in raising money, both to honor, I think, both Armand and Saul Drockler, who had been one of his predecessors at the Detroit Federation. That program, those funds became the Drockler Chair and the Jewish Communal Leadership Program. And he's pleased that I'm doing it now. This program, in all of its permutations, has graduated more than 150 Jewish professionals who, as has been shared, are making a huge impact in Jewish and other social impact organizations literally around the world. This is a legacy of Armand Lauffer, and it is a legacy that will continue to grow with every generation of students in JCLP and whatever its future iterations may be. Bob says, and I think we all share in this, to the extent to which we knew Armand, some of us very well, some of us less, and some not at all. And yet still those people here who didn't know him are also impacted by him. As Bob concluded, I feel truly blessed that I crossed the path of this amazing and visionary man. So thank you to everyone for sharing. Please continue to share here. We have some great food. from great places in Oak Park. And let's just keep building that community together. Thank you.